Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dad Hab Live. I believe this is episode 5, guys. Are we on episode 5? Is what it is so far? 6. Time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. We have a great guest with us today, Antoine Johnson, the program director of the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative. He is a new dad himself, and I am really excited to welcome him onto the show. I obviously have ties to Buffalo with my in-laws, and so I know the area very well, and I read about the work that he was doing up there, and I'm so glad he took the time to join us today. So, Antoine, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
our pleasure. So I want to jump right in here and talk about the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative. And I understand that the program, obviously, like everything, is evolving. But I'm curious because you started this before you were a father. And I'm curious how you got involved in that and how your perspective has changed since becoming a new dad.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great question. So, so I was invited to a fatherhood program back in 2017. And so that was facilitated through a church. And, I didn't think I would learn as much as I did. But the main thing that I took away from it for me was unpacking some of the hurt and the trauma, if you will, around the experience with my own father. And so consequently, being in that environment led me to this position here with Buffalo Prenatal Perinatal Network, as our ED was looking for someone to oversee the fatherhood program at that time.
That's awesome. So I got to ask, what made you go to a fatherhood program back then? Were you planning a family at the time?
I wasn't actually. I was invited by a mentor and a church member in my community who wanted me to hang out, and so he invited me. And so, yeah, I'll be honest. Initially, when I was there, I'm like, I don't think this really pertains to me. But I just learned so much hearing from the guys that were involved, and it was just really enlightening.
Awesome. So I have so many questions that come from this now. You were raised by a single mom, much like myself, and I think that puts us in an interesting position to talk about fatherhood. I was fortunate that I had very strong male role models in my life. So I'm curious for you how that impact of I don't know what your relationship with your father was, if at all, but how did that impact you growing up and lead you to this space?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So for me, yeah, like you said, grew up predominantly with raised by a single mother, and I didn't have a lot of positive male role models in my life as a young person. But as I, got a little older, late teens, early adulthood, like I mentioned, I began meeting people at my church and through school and college who acted as mentors in my life and who were really influential.
That's great. So I'm curious, you go to that church meeting, right, where someplace that you weren't really feeling that you were going to have any benefit from. What did you come
Right.
away from that with? And did you go right into directing this program afterwards?
Yeah, it was almost an immediate transition from graduating the program, and again, the main thing for me going through it was unpacking some of the things that I dealt with as a young person and later on as an adult, and just really being able to address things like feelings of abandonment that I didn't even know were there. We were actually just had
Mm.
a fatherhood group last night, and we were talking about how oftentimes us men, we are angry with our fathers, especially if we didn't grow up with them, and not realizing that the anger is coming from an emotion, for example, like mine, abandonment. And I had never been able to put a name to that. And then I was able to muster up the courage to talk to my father and just have a real open and honest conversation. Not
Wow.
that he would necessarily be apologetic about it. It wasn't about him at that time. It was about my healing and kind of overcoming some of those things. And to be honest, though, that is the experience that prepared me to enter this role as a fatherhood guy now, in terms of helping other dads, because I was able to deal with my own pain.
I like that, the fatherhood guy. We'll make that your unofficial title there,
There you go.
under program director. I love it. So, talk to me about the work that Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative does. At what stage of fatherhood are we talking about? Are we talking about dads to be? Are we talking about current dads? It seems like it spans the gamut.
Yeah, we serve dads from all walks of life. Our tagline actually is now wherever you are, we're with you. And I love that because I think it really encapsulates who we are and what we do with males from all walks of life. For example, our very first class that we had here in Buffalo in 2018, the youngest member was 18 and the oldest was 62. And so the
Wow.
gentleman who was 18 wasn't even a father yet. He was actually caring for his nieces and nephews. And so
Mm,
he was acting as a positive male role model in their lives and wanted to learn some fathering skills from other men. And the 62-year-old had a younger child at probably around 1 or 2 at the time. And he was learning from the group and providing insight based on his experience because he also had adult children. And one of the things that I loved about that member is not only did he join our group later on to facilitate and encourage other men, but he actually went back to his adult children to have an open conversation with them about the lack of his involvement as a father. And I just thought that was so
oh, wow.
powerful. But that was one of the things that he got from the group. And the other reason why I think that's so important to think about is because oftentimes my experience has been is that we don't like to talk about our shortcomings, right? Like if if I did something wrong as a father, it's like it's easier for me to ignore it and say, well, that was in the past, opposed to being able to confront it. The facilitator that I was involved with in my first program mentioned something to the effect of you can't conquer what you won't confront. And I think
Mm.
for him being able to confront the issues of the lack of his involvement with his adult children was so powerful.
Wow, that's awesome there, and to have that perspective from so
Yeah.
many different people who are at different parts of their lives going through that is invaluable there. So, how then did the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative start? Was this something that you spearheaded? Was it already in existence? And what are the type of skills that you guys are working on in this community?
Yeah. So the program started from, my ED, Luann Brown here at Buffalo Prenatal Perinatal Network, seeing a gap in the area of programs that service men or fathers. And so she just went out there and applied for funding and received it. And so then the program was just lacking someone to actually fill the role.
Mm,
And with me coming in, our initial goal was just we need to find the curriculum something that is culturally competent and father specific. And so that's where we started off and it grew from there. So in 2018, we incorporated mentorship for young adult males between 18 and 26. And later on, we adopted a financial education program where we're now working with families in the area of personal finance and developing healthy financial habits. And so that's really what we're doing today. And we've serviced counties outside of Erie County, in just within the Western New York area. But that's pretty much where we are right now.
that's awesome. It's incredible to me that this program, that it was a woman who had the vision for this program, right? And I talk about that all the time. It's that, yeah, this might be with what we've started here, it might be called the dad habit, but it really is about finding your best self so that you can give to those around you who need it most. And that support system, needs to go both ways.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when guys come into the program, because so often we see about all the support that exists for new moms, right? And there's moms groups that are out there. There's resources out there. How do the men receive it when they first come into the program, in your experience?
Yeah, you know what? It is ever evolving. So when I first came in, guys are more reluctant to talk openly. They needed time to really just build trust. And that still happens. But now we're seeing, when the guys are coming into our groups, like one that we just started, second cohort of this year, they're ready to talk
Mm.
and share their experiences for better or worse. And one of the things that I really love about the group dynamic is they begin to bond and really support and lean on one another. We don't like to use the term support group because it just has a negative connotation when it comes to men, but that's the simplest way to explain it. And it's just so dynamic to see the way that the guys are able to, like I said, build trust and then move together as fathers and men.
You mentioned financial literacy being one of the skills you work on. When it comes to these dads that are participating in this program, are they, and I've heard you use the word abandonment or fathers who weren't involved in their children's lives, is that typical of the father who's getting involved in the program? Or are you seeing new dads who are, wanting to, who are just, I guess, understand fatherhood a little bit more and what they're about to face?
Yeah, it's a wide spectrum. Some fathers come in and probably like 25% are coming in with issues related to custody, and they're wanting to know how to navigate the legal system, and
Mm.
how do they effectively co-parent with the mother that they're no longer with. We probably, the other 25% are newer dads, and they're wanting to learn how this thing works, and so it's a wide spectrum in terms of the men that we are able to service.
That's awesome. And when it comes to fatherhood, just overall, how do you see the current state of fatherhood? Because I think one of the things that we talk about so often is how just the role of masculinity in society is changing. The role of dads in the family is changing because the role of women in the family and women in society is changing. So where do
Yeah.
you see that right now? And how are the fathers that you're working with, I guess, dealing with it, coping with it, understanding it?
Yeah, no, a lot has changed over the last few decades or so. We're really just seeing guys step up, for the most part, in terms of just fulfilling their roles. I know that some dads are stay-at-home dads now, and they're becoming more comfortable with that. Other dads are just learning, what it takes to be able to do some more of the direct care, so whether they're, involved in feeding or changing diapers. And yeah, I think, what we're seeing is that dads, are becoming more self-aware of, okay, this is not just the mom's job. This is
Right.
not just something that women do. And so, yeah, that's what I've been kind of seeing.
That's awesome. It's good to see that so many of the fathers are buying in after participating in the program. That's reassuring, I guess, at this stage. So I'm curious, as a new dad yourself, look back if you can at your time before being a dad as part of this program,
Yeah.
and after it. And how did this program prepare you personally for fatherhood? And how has your perspective on the program changed since becoming a dad?
Oh, that's a good question. So for me, the the program has prepared me in terms of being more self-aware of the importance of my involvement. So one of the things that we talk about in the groups are the unique contributions that fathers bring to the table.
Mm,
Not that we're any better than the moms, we're just different. We love
right.
different, we nurture different, we do so many different things. And for me, I just have more of a self-awareness coming into the role as a new father myself, of what I'm bringing to the table. Experientially, I have a greater appreciation for men who are fathers, or just filling that role as a father, because now I know what it's like to go to work with 3 hours of sleep because the baby's been crying all night. And it was easier for me as a facilitator to say, well, just do this, and this will happen. And I'm like, oh no, it doesn't always work like that. So
The game plan goes
so
out the window sometimes.
yeah, exactly. And so, just having the experiential knowledge for me has just given me a greater appreciation for this line of work.
I love that, man. I absolutely love that. And you're right though. So many times it's, I think it's good to have a perspective of someone who isn't a parent sometimes in talking about some of these things, because I do think that sometimes we can get a little bit of tunnel vision, right? You're in that zombie-like mode where you haven't slept in a couple days because you're having a difficult child, or maybe your child is fine and you're not appreciating the sleep that you are getting. And just having
Right.
somebody to kind of give you a macro view when you're stuck in that micro can be really, really important. So I'm curious, when it comes to this program, is this something that is it free for everybody who participates in it? Is there a cost? Is it covered by like a grant or the state? How does that work?
Yeah, so the program is 100% at this time grant funded by and grant and corporate sponsorship funding. We get funding from all over the place, really, but predominantly local foundations in the Western New York area.
Mm.
And because of that, our services and programming and giveaways are at no cost to those who we service.
You know, you mentioned before that fathers play a different role, right? Still an important role, but a different role in the upbringing of their children than the mother does. And I'm curious if any of the fathers that you've dealt with have spoken about fear when it comes to this, because I think that a lot of times guys don't like to acknowledge that, or, they're afraid to acknowledge their own fear. But when it comes to having a child, there is so much responsibility for another human life that I think, and I think mothers deal with this too, but they carry the child, so they're more tethered to it than a father might be. But did they discuss the fear of the responsibility that comes along with that in your group?
You know what? I think that my experience is that fear manifests itself in many different ways. Most of the men that we serve are not comfortable enough, if you will, with
Mm,
saying that there is a fear behind this. And I think, like you said, it will show up. The pressure or the weight of being a father will show up with being stressed, or maybe conflict going on in the household and them not necessarily knowing why. I think the other part of fear motivates them to want to come join the groups.
mm,
And so for me, that it doesn't necessarily come out like that, just like, oh, like I'm dealing with like a lot of pressure, feeling some anxiety and fear around this. It's more like, manifests itself in different forms. But you're absolutely right. Actually, studies will show that when fathers are preparing for fatherhood or to be parents, they are thinking a lot more about the practicalities around it. How will I financially support the child? You know, not so much mental health, but just thinking about the world around them. Whereas moms are like probably more excited about just the experience and different things like that. So yeah, absolutely, there are just the way that fathers and moms experience children are very different,
right, right. And
as
I
you
think,
know.
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I just said as you know.
Yeah, yes, very much so. But when you talk about that, right, about fathers thinking about the financial responsibility that comes along with this, I think that touches on like the changing society, because we're also talking about stay-at-home dads, right, and those who are taking more of an active role from that standpoint. We know that more women are becoming breadwinners in the family, and I think for a lot of men, that's tough to deal with, right, because we've been raised, I mean, if you're of a certain age, you've been raised in a society where the man is supposed to provide for the family. And in modern society, that means financially, because we're not, hunting our meal for dinner anymore. And so I think it has been a mindset shift for a lot of dads, or they need or are in the process of shifting their mindset to understand that providing for that family can mean different things, right? It's what women have always been doing, and maybe men didn't value enough when it
Yeah.
was providing caregiving or providing, a home, and making sure that that stability exists for our children, because we know how important that is. So do you discuss that with some of your fathers? Because I imagine that you have some fathers who are stay-at-home dads, some who are in the workforce, and it's kind of like seeing it from opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, you know what? That's not something that comes up an awful lot. But like you mentioned before, where society is changes so much, than it what it looked like 40 or 50 years ago. And so for us, we indirectly talk about things related to that, so just kind of going back to the direct care, the positive engagement, and things of that nature. I think for us, part of it is normalizing the fact that
Hmm.
it's okay if you want to be a stay-at-home dad. And we
Right.
don't outrightly say that, but just from the different things that we touch on or talk about, I believe that it's implied. And so, I think the other part of it is some men are just not wired that way. Again, if you thinking back over the last few decades, it's like I think it's still becoming socially appropriate or normalized. I don't think for majority of the guys that we work with, that mindset is in there where it's like it's okay for me to work or to be a stay-at-home dad and not feel shame
Right.
about it. During COVID, my mom, I was gonna say my wife had our daughter. I just developed a greater appreciation for stay-at-home parents. It
Right.
is a full-time job all the way. I'm not cut out to be a stay-at-home parent personally, but it is around the clock on a job, especially if you have infants or young children. But yeah, I hope that answers some of your question, but that's just my perspective on it.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and that's what it is. It's about seeing things from different perspectives, which is so important because that helps us understand. When you bring up COVID and you talk about working, I mean, I live in a household. I have a household where both parents work, right? And so to see my wife, and it was very funny because my youngest son was basically 9, 10 months when the pandemic and the shutdown started. And he was at all of those development stages, right? The walking and the climbing and all this. So seeing him from 9 months to, what was a year and a half, basically 2 years almost, where he's been in this lockdown, and seeing my wife deal with that and how it became less and less manageable for her because, I working evenings when there was no daycare, for him to have that support system. I was taking the morning shift and she was taking the night shift, but there was an overlap there where for 3 hours she was trying to do work and be a mother and provide care for our youngest son, and the stress and anxiety that came along with that. I mean, it wasn't something that was sustainable, and so many parents were going through that during this time. So I'm curious, did you do this program virtually through the pandemic, and did some of those issues present themselves from the dads that you're speaking with?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, yeah, we did. We have a great team here, and a lot of the guys just stepped up and were able to almost immediately pivot to offering our groups from a community-based setting in person to virtual. And
Hmm.
so we were still able to service guys in the midst of it or when everything first started. But it was certainly challenging for both my team members and some of the members in terms of balancing being at home and trying to be involved in programming and things of that nature. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more screaming and noise in the background and things of that nature. So it's definitely come with its challenges.
Now, I imagine that you working at a fatherhood initiative organization, they probably had some more flexibility from an employment standpoint and understanding about children being a part of the life and the livelihood of and everything that's going on. But I know
Mhm.
that not everybody is as lucky when it comes to their employers,
Yeah.
when they say, "Oh, keep your child out of the room when you're in that business meeting," or you actually have to leave and go to work and find childcare and all that stuff. So, are you finding anything, and do the dads you're speaking with at all talk about their employment or employers, and are they being more flexible and understanding when it comes to fathers?
Yeah, you know what? That really hasn't come up an awful lot for, I would almost has to say for the majority of our guys, they're working outside of the home. And
Mm,
so unfortunately, a large percent of them don't necessarily have jobs where they have the luxury to just be able to work remotely and have the flexibility with their employers. So,
right.
and that's one of the other reasons why, since we've started, we predominantly offered our groups and our fatherhood sessions in the evenings. So we'll do
Right.
like 5:30 to 7 or something like that. So when, guys are not at work, but for the most part, they were still, if they were so fortunate to still keep their job, having to go out and work.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing that makes you appreciate being employed and having a job and understanding and because the stress and the burden that comes along with losing your job, we know about the impact that that can have on a family structure. When we talk about fatherhood here in general, can you talk about some of the numbers and statistics that you maybe convey to your dads about the importance of having a father in the home and the impact that that has on children positively or negatively, whether they're there or not?
Yeah, no, for sure. So one of the things that we've shared with our guys since we first started in 2017 was the National Fatherhood Initiative statistics. So they have a infographic that outlines the different disparities, if you will, or negative outcomes when it comes to not having a father in the home, particularly the biological father. And so some of those statistics were and still are that teenage pregnancy is 7 times more likely to happen for families raised without a father in a home. Young people are twice as more likely to drop out of school and go to prison or be involved in some kind of delinquency if they don't have their fathers involved. Infant mortality is spikes up and dramatically more likely to happen if the dad is not there. And then the last one I'll share is just child obesity.
Hmm.
Children are more likely to become obese when their fathers are not involved. And when you think about it, I mean that makes sense too, because dads are for the most part like more active and physical than moms are. I know there's a lot of moms who are also active, but more often than not, you'll get the dads that are out there playing basketball or taking the kids to a baseball game or throwing a football outside. And it's just these different things. And so I think that just anecdotally, that may be some reasons why.
Right.
But on the positive side, when fathers are involved, just conversely, children are more likely to earn A's and have healthier diets. Their self esteem dramatically improves for young people. When dads read to their children, we talked earlier about the unique contributions that they bring, and so when I'm reading a book to my daughter, it looks a lot different than when my wife does it. She's reading word for word, and I'm like being really animated and yelling about the pictures and rocking the chairs and all these things that's going on.
Right.
But that contributes to language and literacy development with my daughter. And so there are just these so many different positive outcomes when fathers are involved in doing those things.
Yeah. I have to say, so when it comes to just mothers and being active and the importance of the childhood obesity, as you touched on there, I mean, I remember my mother would take me to the park and we would put up baskets and she would very much made an effort to play both roles, right? But I also know that that was and is draining. And just when you have two parents, now we have so much stimulation with television and iPads and whatever that screen or toy might be that I mean as if a single parent in today's environment, with the burdens that are placed on you, I feel like it would be just so much easier and convenient or necessary to have your child sit down and watch a show or to do something, so that you can cook dinner, so that you can do something else. And having a second parent there is just so beneficial, because you can get them out of the house to do something, so that you can the other parent can concentrate on a task. And it really is having that teamwork and that relationship that is so important. So yeah, I can definitely see the other factors that contribute to the obesity levels. I'm curious, when you tell your dads these statistics and you share them with them, what's the response from them?
Yeah. You know what? Typically, when we share that infographic and those stats, we usually just get an eye-opening response. It's like because we're always in the ground working and doing these things with our kids and our families. And more often than not, unless you're in a field like this, you're not looking at how things are going nationally
Right.
or what could happen if you're not around. And so more often than not, they're just shocked when they're looking at these disparities. Just the thought of thinking one out of every four kids that you see walking down the street does not have their biological father living in the home. I
Wow.
mean, the awareness, it just it's really eye opening.
Yeah. And I think, going from the other side of the fear of the responsibility that comes with having a child, this is another perspective of saying, look how important you actually are, that you matter
Yeah.
in this child's life. And I don't know if that's something that a lot of men think about when they're having children in today's day and age, although it's probably more so than it was a few decades ago. One of the things that we talk about here at the Dad Habit, and that I think is so important, is taking care of yourself, but with the idea of that you're taking care of yourself so that you can take care of those around you.
Yeah.
And I know that so many dads work so hard and get burnt out, right? And then they don't have the patience for their children when they come home, or their wives or spouses or partners or whatever it might be, whoever it might be, when they come home. So I'm curious, do you touch on that at all when it comes to taking care of yourself? And if you do, what are some of the tips and advice that you guys share with your fathers?
Yeah, no, that this is very timely. We were actually just talking about it last night. Session three is always about the power of meeting your own needs.
Mm.
And so, one of the slides that we shared last night had the Maslow's hierarchy of needs on it. And
Yep.
so we started to
Share a
discuss.
little bit about that for our audience who might not be familiar.
Yeah, so just the idea of basic needs, right? Like every human being needs those essential food, clothing, water, and so forth. Then the next thing is I can't even think of the next one, but there's just these different blocks of things that are needed. I know one of the third ones was the need for relationships and
Yep.
just intimacy, having those, like you said, men, they need to feel important, and so having someone there who encourages, say, oh, you matter. One of the other things is, I believe the very top is self-actualization, and so
Mm.
just the idea of, oh, I'm in an environment that I'm able to be intellectual and think about, they have the freedom to think about things that are not necessarily related to what I have to do or need to do,
Right.
being able to dream, if you will.
Yep.
Those things are so important. We had a couple of folks on last night, and so I'm kind of forgetting some of the pyramid, but that's more or less what it is. And we talked about, one of the dads mentioned how they were going through custody battle. And so then we started just talking about the need for healthy relationships, and, then some of them are estranged from their children. And so it's like, man, when I'm not able to connect or see my child for one reason or another, it hurts.
Mm.
I don't feel like a good dad. And so, we started to unpack some of that with them, because like you mentioned, when you're constantly, taking care of the day to day and different things like that, you're not always aware of or thinking about how the lack of healthy relationships impacts you and burdens us mentally. And so you're absolutely right. I love what you said about, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not able to take care of anyone else, because that's exactly why we talk about that in session three. It is that very idea that if you are not able to take responsibility for meeting your own needs, and it's not about being selfish, but it's just, again, like you mentioned, if I'm not able to meet my needs, I'm not going to be able to meet the needs of my children or my
Right.
wife or anyone. So no, that's great. We were right in the same area.
And the metaphors we use all the time, and I think they're becoming a little cliche at this point, is you can't pour from an empty cup because, you
Yeah.
need to recharge and fill yourself up so that you can
Yeah.
pour to others. And then the other one, when you're on an airplane, they tell you to put your mask on first for a reason so that you can help the people around you. So that has helped. And I think, like I said, they are becoming a little bit cliche, but I think they still have meaning for people who hear them for the first time. And
Yeah.
when it pertains to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you touched on there, I think the importance of that. So first of all, we often talk, right, about how people always have problems, right? Mo money, mo problems, Puff Daddy back in the day type of thing. I'm dating myself here. But the idea that once we can have a higher problem, and I use higher just because of the pyramid, if that basic need isn't met, right? And so
Yeah.
you can have a problem at each of those levels, or what we perceive as a problem that somebody else looks and laughs and says, how can you consider that a problem? Look how good you have it.
Right.
But it also, when we address those needs for ourselves, I think it becomes so important because we can identify needs in our children and those around us, right? When their needs aren't being met. And like, I look at it, as something as simple as last night, my 4-year-old being cranky and, throwing a tantrum, something that he doesn't often do. And really, he was just hangry. He was hungry and he wanted to eat. He needed to eat. And we look at his, report from his preschool and says, oh, he didn't eat lunch today. He didn't like his lunch. The kid's hungry,
Yeah.
and that's manifesting itself this way. But when you take care of those needs and look at them in yourselves, it's easier to identify them and in others and where their needs are not being met. So I think that can be so valuable. And when you talk about community, that has been one of the biggest things that I have seen from doing this on my end. And I'm curious from your perspective here, because I've heard from so many people who don't participate in these things or are hesitant to participate in these types of things, that it's hard to make a friend as an adult male. Like, women seem to have that connection and that social bonding and relationship in a way that men struggle with more, especially as they become adults. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, because I have seen that change through some of the programs that we've run. So do you see that happening in your groups? Do you see friendships and bonds forming from that community?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We do. Probably not as much as we would like, but definitely the guys who have, just similar interests, whether it be around sports or just lifestyles, definitely take their relationships beyond the group. Some of them form bonds with our team members, or
Mm,
facilitators. And so that's also cool. And so you're absolutely right. And then that contributes to them being a more healthier father and man who shows up for their family because they have a sounding board or someone to help them keep them accountable. As a matter of fact, right now, I'm actually going through a program through a local church here called Fight Club. And it's, all about being in community with other men who are fathers and, just well respected. And it's helping me to be more responsible and accountable to my family. And so we not only look at things like our spiritual walks, but our physical fitness and
mm.
the way that we're building relationships with other people. And so absolutely, the members who join our groups definitely form bonds and friendships with other men.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. All right, Antoine, we end each of these shows here because we are called the Dad Habit. We believe that small, healthy habit changes can improve and have major, major impact on people's lives. So I'm curious for you, what is one small habit that you have in your life that you think has produced large benefits for you and your family and the people around you?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. As a matter of fact, it makes me think about this book that I'm reading right now called Atomic Habits by
Oh, I
James
love
Clear.
it. That's part of the
Uh,
inspiration for what we do here at the Dad Habit. Atomic Habits, The
okay.
Power of Habit. Yep, those were part of the books that inspired us, and we have a book club that we run over here. So good. I'm glad to hear you're reading that.
Nice, nice. You know, for me recently over the past year, one of the things that I've been doing, apart from other things that I've recently started, is just starting my day outlining, what's going to happen from A to Z, and then
Mm.
having at least three top priority things that I'll take care of. So if nothing else happens before the day is out, I'll have at least three things that I accomplish. And that for me has yielded tremendous benefits because I've been able to make traction on things that I probably would not have otherwise if I had not developed that habit.
I love it, man. I love it. Doing that, though, taking those small steps forward, even though they're small steps, they're still forward. And I don't know who said it, but I wish I could give them credit. A failure to plan is a plan to fail. And so I
Yeah.
love the fact that that you're reading the book, two, that you're obviously making those goals and reaching them by taking some time to outline it. Antoine, man, this
Yeah.
has been a real pleasure. I appreciate it. I want to give you one last plug here. Where can people find out more about the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative if they're interested?
Absolutely. Visit www.bppn.org/BFI.
Awesome. That's Antoine Johnson from the Buffalo Fatherhood Initiative. We really appreciate your time today. Go check out all the great work he's doing up there. As I mentioned, I have some ties to Buffalo, so hopefully we can get together when I'm up there sometime. But everybody listening, thank you for taking the time today. We really appreciate. Don't forget to like, follow, share, all that good stuff. And if you know somebody who can benefit from this, please tell them. Have them join the Dad Habit community. We would love to have them here because that's what this is all about. Until next time, everybody, remember, small habits lead to big wins. Take advantage of them. Thanks for taking the time to listen with us today.